Hey, how's it going? You're just in time. We got Bob Deane from Bob Deane Pottery in there, and we're talking about dream chasing. Now, it's difficult. There is an art to making it work. Welcome to the Art of Possibility podcast, where we talk to creatives about how they did it. Come on, have a listen.
My company name is Bob Deane Pottery. I'm a potter, ceramicist, artist, labels, whatever. But I work with clay, and I love it. As a young person, I played in the creeks a lot, caught frogs, made mud pies, went swimming. And so when I realized that clay, the thing out of a bag, could be a thing I could make and create with, I was like, wow, I feel really connected to that. And then in college, I took a course. I switched my major from business to art, and I really dove in 100%. All right, so it was 1988, 89. I had graduated from Bloomsburg University. I got a job in a restaurant, Valerie's, and I was really excited. It was like the cool restaurant. I was going to be a waiter. I was going to make decent money. I was going to meet a lot of people. And then 2 weeks into the job, I got fired because I'm a space cadet, whatever. And I was like, oh, that really pushed me down into a little hole. And I ended up getting a job at the Stop and Go, the local convenience store, which became the Unimart. I was waiting for my fiance, Lauren, to graduate. So I stayed in Bloomsburg an extra year, which I didn't like. Bloomsburg was a hick town. And so I would work second shift and third shift. And I remember being 19 years old, working, making $3.50 an hour. And I was like, who am I? I'm a convenience store worker. Or I'm Bob Deane, I'm an artist. But I'm not. Like, I'm painting in my studio, but there's no other tracings of who I'm going to be other than one thing. The only thing that I have is a really firm belief in myself. And I had that conversation for a year, like at least once a week for about an hour while I was cleaning, making hoagies, making coffee, talking to the fun, weird people who came in, you know, the third shift workers coming in or out, all of which I would develop rapport. But it was like a time where I really looked into myself and had to like frame who I wanted to be and who I thought I was going to be. And it was like ground zero, and everything was just little steps from there forward. And of course, it was a lot easier once I had a little bit of momentum. Circa 1999, many years later, I read a book called Out of the Earth into the Fire, and she talked about digging your own clay. And I was like, yes, I want to do that. I had done that periodically, but I had also bought a pug mill. I had a talisman. I had 55-gallon drums. My business had grown to the point where I was then ready to dig all my own clay.
Real quick, what's a pug mill?
It's a thing for mixing clay.
Okay.
It's a clay mixer.
All right.
And so then I began a journey of digging my own clay and going back to all the places that I had loved as a child and catching frogs and going for swims and bringing clay back. And now people say, well, where do you get your clay? Like some clay's better than other clay. Well, no, one clay's not better. One dog's not better than another dog. One tree's not better than another tree. They're all equal. Do you like that tree? Do you understand it? Do you appreciate it? Do you know how to use it? So if I like a place, if I like Ridley Creek, if I like our place in Millville, then I get clay from that, or the Bay, and then I understand that clay and I utilize that clay in whatever way is going to work best for me.
That's really interesting. So I have so many questions, but so that being said, can you walk me through the process of what it's like? Like, you find a spot, and then you want to begin getting the clay out of that particular environment.
I want to say, where's clay? Clay's everywhere.
Right.
Like, where do you find a rock? Imagine that rock are the big ones and clay are the little ones. So it's everywhere. Everywhere.
So, do you use a shovel? Do you use something?
So one of the important things for me is how far is the car from the clay? Because if they're 300 yards apart, I'm going to get 4 buckets of clay. I'm going to be tired. I mean, like, that day sucked because carrying two 60-pound buckets 300 yards is exhausting. So I want the clay and the car to be about 10 feet apart.
Okay.
And so then I find clay, I get a shovel, 5-gallon buckets, I fill the 5-gallon buckets up with clay, I put them in my car, I drive my car back to my house. Then in my studio in the back, I have two 30-gallon drums, not buckets or trash cans because they need to be a little bit higher density so they don't explode from all the mixing. I pour the 5-gallon buckets into the 30 gallons and then I fill that with water till when you mix it all up with a mixer, a drill with a concrete mixer on the bottom, it turns into a slip, a fine watery mix. And then I have a stainless steel mesh. I pour that slip through the mesh into 55-gallon drums. And then I let the water settle to the top. Scoop the water out, and then when I've scooped enough water out and it's firm, then I mix that clay through the pug mill, and I take the recycled clay from the Wallingford Art Center where I teach. I mix those two together, and I begin creating. So dig, bring home, sieve, decant, mix with some recycled clay. Now, I've read a lot. I've cut out about 80% of the steps that other people have in processing clay.
What are some of the steps that you've cut out?
Well, I just do one test. I just pour it all into a sieve and then I mix it and then I use it. Like I don't need to do a lot of tests.
What would one of those tests be?
Well, yeah, like I would just do a test of temperature, iron content, plasticity. Like all clay is good clay. I know I'm going to use the clay. If it's not plastic, I'll add a thing. If it has a lot of iron, I'll add less iron bearing clay to make it more workable. If it has a lower temperature, melting temperature, I might turn it into a glaze, or I'll only use a little bit of it. If it has a lot of rocks in it, I might use it'll be more spotty in color. So I'm from the presumption that it's going to work out great. I have to understand it.
Yeah.
I just have to understand it. As soon as I understand it, we're going to be friends.
Yeah. So the process of like how to get the clay from the environments that you choose back to your place, prepare it for processing, you get to the slip. Where did you learn that step-by-step process? And like, how many times did you, like, what did you do in the early days when you needed to do that for yourself? Where did you learn it? And how'd you get started doing it right?
Before, and I always thought like you're buying clay in a plastic bag.
Yeah.
Like we put everything in plastic bags. Like you buy your food in a plastic bag, like grow some of your own food. Like rocks. You buy rocks in plastic bags. Do you know how funny that is? Do you know how many rocks are out there? Like people buy firewood. Like like there's firewood everywhere. Like I just collect pallets to burn, right?
Yeah.
So I always felt that. And then I read the book by Mimi Opsler, Out of the Earth into the Fire. And that really, like, it didn't teach me a whole lot, but it excited me. And then it was just trial and error. Like I would just bring the clay. And I made a couple of mistakes where I made some pieces and the clay had a lower enough melting temperature and I had some melting in the kiln. I was like, uh-oh, bad boy. Because then I had a mess to clean up and grinding shells and trying to do things under the cover of shame and night.
I gotcha. So this is a good point to start tying everything back. So bringing it back to your story from the 80s, you know, you're working at the Unimart, the Mini Mart.
Unimart, yeah. Stop and Go got bought out in Unimart.
Right. So around that period of time, like you were saying, you were telling yourself what you needed to be feeling. Like once a week for probably a year, right?
Yeah, so I had to have that conversation with myself.
Right. So that's kind of when the gradual lead up to the point where, you know, you began to start making moves, you began to start, you know, fleshing things out for yourself, right? So what really was the point where it moved from being a feeling to saying, okay, I might actually be able to do this instead of just thinking about it on my own? I can actually start going out there and, you know, making some of this happen.
Well, one thing that I would say before that was I realized that artwork is this like beautiful child that you are responsible for, your pieces of artwork. And so what I didn't want to do was I didn't want to corrupt my artwork by being overly reliant on, I'm going to make a living being an artist, and then I'm going to be corrupted by the marketplace, and I'm going to get enthusiastically people wanting me to do things I don't want to do. So what I thought is, no, I'm just going to have part-time jobs. I'm going to cook or clean or do whatever I need to do energetically so that when it's Bob in his time with his artwork, he's just listening to his heart. He's 100% what do I want to do? What do I feel? Just close my eyes. What's the next thing I'm supposed to do? And I wasn't ever sure that I was going to be like a successful artist. I thought that isn't the goal. My goal at 18 years old was to produce great artwork that I was proud of. Because if I connected great artwork and being successful, I was like, I don't know if that's that's a hard thing to do both of. And I'm not on this planet Earth for 80 or so years to be like, that's pretty good, and I sold a bunch of it. No, I want to be really proud of what I do.
So what is your connection to great artwork? Like what drives you to create something that you're really proud of?
Well, in terms of my functional work, and I had to interact with this mug, but I want something. This is how I like to think of it, and I've written this up maybe better than I'm going to say it. I want you to look at something that I've made, and I want you to want to touch it. I want you to think it looks good, and I want you to pick it up. And then when you pick it up, I want you to think that feels good. And not necessarily consciously. This can be all the subconscious thing. That's a confirmation that I've done something well. And in terms of more abstract things, like less representational, functional, then I'm always exploring, I think if you were to say, what's an overall motif, the inside of the body, or the inside of the truth, the inside, like you present to me a picture of who you are, and you present a picture, but beneath this surface thing is something that's way more interesting. And so how do we get there? How do we get past the superficial conversation to something fun? So my artwork is I want to show you something that's on the inside. Like it could look like bones or anatomy or sexual organs or something. And I was like, oh, I'm not sure what that is. It makes me feel a little bit weird, but it's interesting. That's great artwork. Or sometimes I've done a lot of tree stuff. I love trees, and from a young age I was like, so interesting about trees. I got this big bush, I got this other thing below ground. How do those two things relate? I know they relate. Are they I've wondered my whole life, and the answer is yes or no. Is the perimeter of the outside of the tree the same as the perimeter of the roots, or do the roots go further? I'm not actually sure, and the answer is not one or the other. So it's what's underneath? What's the secret in my artwork that I'm trying to find and then trying to share?
That's really interesting.
Discovery, yeah.
Okay. Do you ever find your conversations day in and day out, just working with people, right, kind of develop a need to find something that's beneath the surface a little bit? You go about, you were doing the part-time job gig on the side. I'm not sure how long it took you.
Many years.
Yeah, right. So, you ever find as you're going about your normal work and everybody's talking a bunch of nonsense and you just don't care about it, it kind of motivates you to make something that goes further beneath the surface.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of times, I think, you listen to the sound of your own voice, and how thrilled are you by that? So sometimes we talk a lot. We're not communicating. No. If you think you're making a difference in that other person's life, you're an idiot and a fool, right? Just choose one or the other. So a lot of times I won't say what I'm thinking because I don't think the other person is going to hear me, so why am I wasting my time? So then what I'll try to do is I will try to bring that side back inside myself. And it can be demonstrably in my artwork, or it could just be in an interior narrative that I have about how I'm going to be a better person, how I'm going to rise above things which I don't like.
I like that second one in particular. I feel like that's just taking everything from any human interaction I have with somebody, and not necessarily the goal of that being, not even necessarily having a goal, but thinking about it in retrospect after I've finished a conversation with somebody, and then saying, how has that changed my perspective a little bit, in the way that I carried myself and the way that that other person carried themselves, and how can that affect my art going forward? And and I find it manifests itself very unpredictably in artwork. I might suddenly, 3 years down the line, think of a single conversation I had with somebody, and that becomes a large part of a song. And that's not necessarily even inspiration, but just the emotion that was tapped into, or the moment that was tapped into, that brought that.
Yeah, it percolated in you for a long time. You didn't know how it was going to manifest. And then when it did, you're like, oh yeah, look at that.
Yeah.
No, that like this whole idea really reminds me of back when I was a door-to-door salesman selling windows, and I just remember having so many conversations with people that wanted so little to do with me, and like it was really funny because like it was like before the studio, it was before anything ever made sense. I was just like, I need time and money, and well, this is where we're starting, you know? And then I would go around talking to people. It'd be horrible weather. These people would hate me. They would never want to talk about windows, right? And I would set up this thing for myself back when it was just like me performing music where like I would use this like kind of boxed in frustration of just these like mind numbing conversations with people as a reason to be like, okay, get leads on the van for the day so you can disappear into the woods and write some lyrics because you still got 3 hours left on the day, man. So you just gotta like get enough good leads and then you can not worry about this anymore. And like I found that like the more frustration I put myself in front of, the more likely it was I would write anything that was even remotely good. And the days where I was like, nah, it's been a great week, you know? I'm just gonna go into the woods first today. And I was very relaxed. Nothing would come of it. And so like it's very interesting to me talking about like beneath the surface. Sometimes you gotta be reminded of where the surface is to start, you know, getting underneath it. And that's something it's like it's a constantly moving target and it's different from person to person. But the idea itself, I hear talked about a lot in very creative circles, and there's a lot of different ways to describe it. But yeah, so that's what I did in making windows and stuff. And selling windows.
I have to recoil from talking to people, I think, nowadays, because for the longest time that was like my inspiration. Like I have the opposite feeling about talking to people who don't want anything to do with me or aren't saying anything interesting, because to me that is interesting because it's like it's humans, it's other humans that aren't me who are doing either nothing or something. So my favorite thing about going out and going out way too much was that. You know, I'd show up at a place that I definitely did not belong, being berated by people who didn't want me there, frat parties or, you know, like an art show, and I have no idea. I don't know any big words for that at this point in time, and just not belonging and then taking that and then writing a poem about it. But now it's gotten in the way because now I do it too frequently and I'm just overloaded with like...
I think another thing to switch a little bit to under the surface. I remember, gosh, I forget the exact time, but fractals came out and that whole geometry. I was like, oh yeah. Yeah. Even before I started doing a lot of LSD, I was like, there's a certain pattern that's existing beneath all the patterns. And I've been trying to get to that for a while. And I was like, there's a science to that. There's equations. I was like, thank you. That means a lot to me. So I was chasing something, this like, it's not hidden pattern, but it's not like nature, like a fern. It's the perfect little fractal pattern. But leaves and trees are creating the same patterns. It's just not as clearly fractal until you know what a fractal is. And I was like, okay, now we got each other. So that was super exciting to me.
No.
It's not necessarily validation, but it's like, okay, now I could put a whole bunch of words on all these feelings that I've had since I was 10 years old.
Yeah. So, all right, bringing it back here for a minute. So how long did it actually take you to move away from like part-time and your art to the point where you're doing art full-time?
So we moved back, Lauren and I got married in 1989. I moved back and I was walking through downtown media and I saw a store. I went down a road I never went down. And I saw a store that had tie-dyes in I was like, tie-dyes in media. Well. And I peeked my head in the window. It was a Monday and it's closed. And I was like, that's really interesting. And look who needs a job. And the Matt McKay came out and he was like, can I help you? I was like, I see you have tie-dyes in the window. I love to tie-dye. I go to Grateful Dead shows. Imagine that. I love LSD. This all fits together. I didn't say those parts. I was thinking it loudly. And he's like, come on in. And we started to talk. He's like, we need a store manager. I was like, well, look at who you're talking to. So we decided it like in 10 minutes that I was going to take over his store. So I ran his store. I made $7 an hour. I worked about 35 hours a week running Whatchamacallit. It was the name of the tie-dye store in media.
It was called
Whatchamacallit, yeah.
Makes sense.
All right, just
It
wanted to
was
make sure.
89, 90, and 91. But at the same time I had that job, which was like enough to survive, I also did office cleaning for my friend John Scott. So I vacuumed floors, changed trash, and cleaned bathrooms. And I also took care of an elderly woman a couple nights a week. So I did those other things because I knew that saving money was the secret to not being bitter.
Oh yeah.
We had that conversation. So I can go into that. But so I was working a lot and making a lot more money than I had been when I was making $3.50 an hour in the store. But I also knew I was going to be saving money because as an artist, the secret isn't necessarily how much you can make. It's how low can you keep your expenses? And can you save money? Because saved money is money that makes money. And that's the leverage to lead the life that you want, not to be a slave to a paycheck. Anybody who thinks that being a slave to a paycheck is a good idea needs another hug.
Yeah. I am really curious how.
So I'm going to go back to your question in a minute of what was my timeline? What was my success timeline?
This probably ties into that, but I'm really curious how the saved money makes money, how that worked for you, how you saw that come into fruition in your life.
Okay. Well, let me do the career part first.
Yeah.
So then in 91, the tie-dye thing was ending. We had been in media, but we also had a store in Long Beach Island, in Surf City, where we were selling tie-dyes. So 2 years of that, it had run its course. It wasn't making as much money, whatever. And then the Wallingford Art Center where I now teach, the caretaker position came out. It's like, Lauren comes in at 2 o'clock in the morning. Ted's leaving. You could be the caretaker. And I was like, that is the stupidest idea ever. My whole life is about avoiding responsibility. I'm an artist. How am I going to avoid responsibility and be responsible for a huge building? What a dumb idea. And I fell back to sleep. But then, like, I woke up the next morning with the panic of, like, what's the next step in my career going to be? And I ended up getting that job, and I was a caretaker there from 1991 to 2004, at which point I had saved my $70,000, and I was able to buy a house. I put 50% down on the house. So I only had a $100,000 mortgage.
Nice.
I was teaching, and so I had more than enough money to then just be an artist. But that's where the money, and I was also, that money was making me money. It was invested in the stock market also.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Because this is like, oh my God, take this home with you. Like, if you save money and you invest that money pays dividends, and that means all you have to do is this, and you're making money. That's what wealthy people do. Wealthy people don't have jobs. They have trust funds. They have stock portfolios.
Yeah.
And the only thing stopping you from being one of them is the patience to not spend all your money for 15 or 20 years. So then...
It's a lot of patience.
So I think I answered both questions.
Oh yeah, 100%. No, it's
So
it's really-
2004, I really moved away from the art center where I had a full-time position as caretaker, was teaching a couple classes a week, and was selling my pottery full-time.
It's got to be nice. No, I think it's funny because, like, so many of the things you're saying I can relate to, like, with uncomfortable lucidity here. It's like, you know, like, I'll go in between these phases where, like, I'm saving up just every single dollar I can get my hands on. I'm like, unfortunately, being very careful about, like, how much coffee I'm drinking, like, who's keeping the lights on and stuff. And I'll save up as much money as I can. So then, in the next period of things, I can be very careful about how I waste it, right? Because like with audio gear, it's just so damn expensive. It's so unbelievably expensive. So, right, like, I'll have like a slate of things in front of me that I'm like, all right, so these are the different things that I really want to get, and they're all just so unreasonably priced, but I'll save up for all of them, right? And then by the end of it, I'll only end up getting like one or two of them. And then the rest gets saved away, and then I use it to, you know, bring in some business at the studio. And when it's time to upgrade, I sell it and buy something better. And like studio work is definitely different, absolutely. But the core principle of saved money makes money, I don't exactly know where I learned it. But all I know is that every time I haven't done that, I get screwed. And every single time that I do, wonderful things happen. So...
But it's not just saving money. You invest that money.
Yes,
that money
yes.
provides dividends. And so $50,000 saved is $4,000 a year you don't have to do anything for the rest of your life. $100,000 is $8,000 a year. Now, that's a lot of money for a little bit of money. But that $100,000 also can go buy a house. You know, I've had to liquidate my savings on 3 different occasions to buy properties or to get out of a marriage. But I had it there. So I didn't have to sell the house I was living in. I created the resources to take the next step in my life while never making a lot of money. I never had those boons.
This is really funny actually. When you said, well, it's not just about saving, it's also about investing. I didn't even think to say that because it's just like such a core part of like how I think about things. Like I'm only saving money so I can like put it into something that's gonna, pay back to the future. So that way, as soon as humanly possible, life can start being life. Because like the hustle and bustle of every single day is it's a lot to deal with for anybody. But that's why being patient and planning is so inextricably important. it's really crazy, and that's having a good community around you is really important for planning, because if you can't, for a lot of people, it's very difficult to have that like feedback with the world to know that you're moving in the right direction. Right? But there's absolutely times where, everybody doesn't have the appropriate community, right? To know like when the decisions they're making are pulling them in the right direction. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But like what was the community like for you, and like how was like your family, your friends reinforcing, getting in the way? Like what were the people around you throughout all this like?
Well, I would say that I created a bubble around myself, and I be careful not to let people in who I'm not interested in hearing what they have to say, both literally or emotionally, right? So I'm Bubble Bob in that respect. And my parents were very neutral. That my dad's like, just get a college degree, whatever you do, that's fine. And my mom's like, whatever you want to do is fine, just be happy. So I didn't have any brothers or sisters. I didn't have a lot of input, and so I didn't get a lot of input, and I wouldn't subject myself to the input. I wouldn't expose myself to people who I wouldn't understand. So like, what good is that going to do? But what I would go back to what you were saying, like if you're buying equipment, if you're building a thing like a music studio and you're going to be like musicians and whatever, there are many permutations of that. That's building. That's not buying a new car, right? An asset that's going to lose all its value, right?
Right.
So you're building capital to something. But what I would say to you is, what does your success story look like?
Well,
And how are you going to monetize $50,000 in musical equipment?
Well, so this is the interesting thing about that. So one is that you got to be really mindful of your prices. A, you got to make sure to actually put yourself out there. B, and C, you got to have constant exposure, be engaged with the community. These are like three top tier things always, right? But this is also why it's very important to buy quality gear and analog gear. Because not only, right, are you in a position where now all of a sudden you can record, people with a little bit more talent, a little bit more experience, a little bit more practice, who are going to expect a song that's recorded at your space of a certain caliber, right? But additionally, if you're buying the old school stuff, a lot of this stuff gains value over time, right? So it's not just that you're buying this like thing so you can save a couple of bucks doing this, but 20 years down the line it's going to be worth $10, right? But you can start investing in microphones now, get a whole bunch of life out of them, treat them well, and then 10, 15 years down the line be able to sell them for 10, 15 times what you originally bought it for.
Right.
So not only do you get the ability to like have a whole bunch of fun with stuff that sounds amazing and be able to service people who are like really committed to their craft, really committed to the music that they're making, but additionally, when it comes time to move on, you can sell it and make back way more than you put into it. And like keeping track of like what the fluctuating like resale prices are for gear, it's an everyday practice, but it starts to become very fun once it stops giving you headaches.
It's like that Frank Sinatra mic.
Yeah, just like that Frank Sinatra. Yeah, we had an old RCA 44. It was from like 1938, but it was so well taken care of. There was this wonderful man out in New Jersey who helped us get it for a very, very good deal. And around the time that we were buying this place here, right? We were like 2-3 weeks from settlement, and I had it listed online for quite a pretty penny, like probably more than the going rate was at the time, right? And I just kept it there, and I kept it at that price. Deep down, I really didn't want to sell the microphone, right? So that's why I kept it at the higher price, right? And then we're getting closer and closer to settlement. I'm a couple thousand short, and I'm like, oh boy. And I was like, so I remember like talking with my wife, and we were saying like, all right, well, it's the price we got it listed at right now. We need to sell this thing, right? So when you wake up tomorrow morning, just like take a deep breath and lower the price because we got to get somewhere, right? And I remember waking up in the middle of the night at like 3 a.m. This is just after we went to bed having the same conversation. And I see a notification, and this like guy in Japan bought at full price. And I'm like, oh, baby, that's what I'm talking about. Oh, well. And I was like, Aaron. And I was like, dude, what? I got work in the morning. I'm like, we did it. Like, anyway. But it was really funny because like we made back probably like $4,000 on that microphone. Right, and that was the thing that finally put us over the finish line. But like keeping track of all the information about what makes something quality, what keeps the value going up, how it's treated, how it's stored, the capsule inside, the ribbon inside, the cables you're using, the moisture in the air. It's crazy, right? But all the stuff contributes, and you play your cards just right, you can get a lot back from it in the future. You know, every like artistic endeavor is very different.
I feel like our generation feels strange, feels back and forth about investments, and like a lot of it is we haven't had enough time to be able to see returns, to be able to do things that we can see forward our careers right now, and so it kind of feels like we don't know what's actually gonna work. I hear a lot of confusion about stocks, about trying to pick what stocks will work, trying to decide is it even worth it to invest anyway, considering we might be a generation that doesn't even get to retire with just how much how much shorter our money goes. And then going into artistry, then this almost poverty mindset starts to form around, well, I can't really afford a mic that'll actually make my voice sound better. I can't afford the tools that are gonna help me mix my clay better. So to be able to actually create a business with it. So would you have any advice for that kind of anxiety?
If you're in your 20s, say under the age of 27 or 28, and you save $200 or $300 a month, you will be able to retire. If you do that, you will be able to retire. You don't even have to invest it well. But most people, they lack the discipline to do that, and they'll save up a certain amount of money, and then they'll spend it, and that's great. But there's a discord with you, but in people in general, and not just your generation, with the discipline that it takes to have success and the desire to actually succeed. In terms of abundance and not abundance, like a lot of abundance is a mindset. So my father said something to me which is very interesting to me. He said a man in jail has a lot of freedom. He doesn't have to worry when he's going to eat. He doesn't have to worry about having a job. He has all the time in his head that he wants. He can do all the writing that he wants, and he can do all the reading that he wants. I think that's right. That's a lot of time to do those things. Right? So you maybe need to look at your abundance mindset or your lack thereof, right?
I kind of would like to back up a little bit and go back to the idea of building, because while I still face those same decisions of where to spend my money, how is it best spent, what can be managed, right? Like the battle of saving things up for music equipment and then spending a lot at once because things are expensive, whether that be cameras or microphones or software or any of those things that are like integral to getting my art to the point that is like to like you said earlier that your goal as a young artist, right, was not necessarily to make money or to be successful
As an artist.
It
Financially.
was, yeah.
Right.
It was to make the art exactly the way it has to be.
For me,
Like,
for my heart.
Yeah.
I am exactly the same way.
Right.
And there are definitely physical obstacles that prevent me from reaching some of that, like the threshold for perfection, I guess I'd say. Like going from like a super cheap like USB microphone to a decent XLR microphone was a huge jump for me in terms of like my ability to hear the emotion that I put into the performance, because I could give a perfect performance into that USB microphone, but it wouldn't capture it in the same way that the more expensive one would. And so here I am kind of working like 35 hours a week, like making okay money, but also like kind of I feel I need to find something better than my current position, and my margins are pretty thin when it comes to like my priorities my priority as a human being is to make the best art possible. And so it's been leading to some difficult decisions being made on like, okay, can I save another 100 this month, or do I spend that on the software where I could make the best art possible this month in comparison to that? So
I would say two things. First of all, I had a
Yeah.
full-time job and 2 part-time jobs,
Mm-hmm.
and
That's
none
right.
of that was pottery.
yeah.
So
yeah.
why didn't I get pissed at myself when I was working 3 or 4 nights a week? Because that
Mm-hmm.
was all money that I was going to save to put into my stock portfolio. So I created a budget,
Mm-hmm.
and then I created an amount of physical work that exceeded that budget in jobs that I did not hate.
Yeah.
Right? I hated working in the convenience store ultimately,
Yeah.
right? So, and then I saved that money.
Yeah.
So I just had a mindset of abundance. I just had to work hard to get there. I had to work a lot. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Lot of
so
patience.
I
Lot of
wanted
patience.
to have a property out in the woods of southern New Jersey. It took me 8 years to find that property.
Yeah.
Maybe 11, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
So again, what's your timeline, right? So it took me 9 years. I'm 8 to 11 years. I'm not sure. So if I were in your shoes, I'd be like, okay, by 3 years from now, I want this. In 5 years from now, I want this. In 7 years from now, I want that.
What is the budgeting required to make that happen?
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe I would just encourage you to either slow down the amount of time it takes for you to get the equipment that you feel you need
Yeah.
to express yourself, or I'd increase the workload outside of music
Yeah.
to accelerate that.
I love this guy. I just like, oh man, yes, all of that, 100%.
And of course, there's these, here's the best thing about the most important advice that you're going to get. This is the reaction to that.
No, it's,
No, I don't mean you.
But you gotta like thirst for the
But
pain.
no, but the
you know?
advice that
It's
we
great.
really need is the advice that we almost often don't want,
Yeah.
right? Because if I
Yeah.
want to talk to you about expressing yourself, you're going to be lapping it up because you're right there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But I'm talking about working more and extending your timeline.
Yeah.
You don't want to hear that.
No,
That sucks.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel you. I understand that
Right.
very much. And it's hard because right now, I guess it's always changing and it's always continuous. But right now, I'm at a point in my life where I feel the art has changed and evolved in ways that I never would have expected, and is now like just so exciting to jump in and create and work and grind that as hard as I can. And like the place that's difficult is just to like, where do I draw the line in terms of how many hours a day can be dedicated to the art itself versus working, and like, because if it was just up to me and like I had none of these pressures and I was fully free, it would be like every waking moment would be the art, every single waking moment. And so like, once again, like I like extending the time frame. That makes more sense than buckling down harder, because buckling down harder right now means less time for the art. And I mean, that's tough. That's a tough thing to
Right,
do.
and you don't have to do any of those, but it's
Yeah.
just two different ways to look at it's two practical ways to look at an equation
Yeah.
that gets you the input that you want, right?
yeah,
the equipment
exactly.
that you want, or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that also forces people in crafts that feel like you have to do something big young, like music.
Prodigy.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
like
because in classical, like you're done at 16.
yeah, exactly.
Like if you're not a prodigy, you're never like you might be like second bassoonist. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's like it's so weird. Like you think it's all just in rock and roll, and if you're not 16 in the star, you're past all. It's even worse in the classical world, which is so weird to me. But yes, I'm sorry.
No, yeah, I think that like that's a really hard dissonance to deal with when you think like if you're not there by 26, I'm 26 right now. If you're not there by 26, you're done. You can't really do anything else. I think honestly, yeah, I'm gonna be honest and say I've had a little bit of that. That is definitely part of my story. And it was not easy to look around and extend my timeline for what I want to be able to do, and to think about or separate my need for just creating the art the way that I need it to be and the having the best music business that gets me the furthest.
So this I think this is really interesting. So I think what you just said really relates to what you just said, and I'm going to try and tie it together here. So something that I like to think about frequently is how to train your instinct, right? Because on the one hand, right, part of what, you don't want to have things that are inherent bad obligations, right? And at the same time, you also want to be able to tell, well, how much time can I dedicate to my work throughout the day, right? And essentially the way that I've really tried to think about it is that how can you work to structure your life to create these positive feedback loops, right?
Yeah.
So it's essentially like, how can you figure out a way to where what you do for like your normal job, even if it's just like the people you work with, the color of the counter you're staring at all day, like, a fun shop you remember from when you were younger, that's just like really close by, you can stop by, get a sandwich at afterwards. Everyone has their own thing, right? But essentially, and this could also be the other side of things, right? Kind of like how I was talking about when I was selling windows, a bunch of bad conversations made me want to write lyrics. For me, the work-life balance early on was, all right, well, I want to hate this so I can learn to appreciate it and then use the things that don't actually matter in the long run as fuel towards my creativity. I use creativity to say, okay, well, now I need these things, so I got to work more, I got to get more money, right? And everyone is different. Hopefully people out there can find something that means what they do in their part-time jobs is a little bit more of a positive contribution. I was a little bit different, but it's also the same. It's also the same training your instincts to figure out when you get that feeling like that's enough for today, or I can absolutely take this for another hour or two, right? It's the same area of thinking, but the ways that it translates through each individual person varies so wildly, and it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's very hard to find a line where it's like, that's enough for the day for me, especially because I can just go and go and go. And
Yeah.
I'm curious. So I think you said two things. One, you felt like maybe by the age of 26 you'd sort of pass through the like success window.
Yeah, because like it's
And like to be like a rock star, or I'm not sure what you mean exactly.
This I hear this a lot. I heard this pretty recently from someone else who I don't know much about this person, but they said they were talking about she just turned 25, so like her life is over at this point pretty much.
I'm sorry.
And that idea, I feel like, is such a common thing for artists, for artists who are like gunning to make it. Se.
Right. Well, that's a heavy
sure.
label,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, definitely.
What does that look like, though?
That's a big question. Like we're talking about people who watched that whole era of rappers between like 2015 and now, who are like children who are 17, 18, blow up, and honestly at this point a lot of them have burned through their
Do
careers.
you want to be that? I mean,
I want to be someone who has sustained success, and
you're talking about you're talking about a portion of fame and a portion of a whole lot more money.
Yes.
Right. And
Yeah.
you're craving that. Well, that's not very healthy for an artist to fixate on. So I'd encourage you to let go of a lot of that. Not all of it, because then you'd be lying to yourself. But let go of a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so honestly,
And just go back into, but I would say, what is your success story going to be? Create a realistic story of how you're going to succeed, and then begin a slow, multi-year march towards that. And I'll talk about my success story too, and what were the concrete pieces that I put together. They're so different, right? Because I'm not a musician. And
I'm really interested. in
and
hearing this
then I would say, don't lose sight. When we talked about this in the car, really appreciate the little successes. Spend a lot more time.
very bad at that.
Well,
I said the
don't
same
laugh though, because you got bitter guy. He's just right here. He's waiting. He will slowly get closer to you if you don't work proactively, reactively to not let that happen.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So So in the '80s, I'm the clay guy, and I'm like, pottery. There's a tech revolution. It's all computers. Like my friend Mark, he went to New York City. He made millions of dollars. How smart are you? I'm the clay guy. My friend Mark's the computer guy. Well done. But here was my thinking. This was my success story. Sure, we're automating. We're computerizing. But there's going to be a backlash against that. And people are going to like handmade. They're going to like handheld. They're going to like intimate. They're going to like an artist story. I knew that circa 1986 or 87. So that was my thing. I'm going to create an artist who goes out on Wednesday. I didn't know about Wednesday night dining under the stars 35 years ago, but I knew when that presented itself, I would be that guy out there creating the me narrative. And I create the me narrative at the folk festival, right? I'm not just selling, I'm like sharing, but I'm not suffering. I'm having fun, and there's kids there, and we're chatting it up and goofing off. So it wasn't just making it, but it was creating an experience, and then creating work that you like to experience, right? It's warm, it's tactile, it's physically attractive, and I could like this, and like this if I had pieces. And then I made 2 big compromises. And that really set my success story on its way. So the first one is, boop, the road split. Road 1 was the art, was the abstract, pure Bob. It doesn't matter if anybody else likes it. I have lots of artwork. I was like, nobody likes that. It's like, whatever, I'm still there. And the other one is the pottery. Because the college guy, I'm not a potter, I'm an artist. Circa 1988, Bob. Hey, I'll make a mug here and there, but I'm not a potter. But in 1991, I joined the guild, professional guild.
There's a guild.
And it took about 10 years, but I realized I liked making the pottery a lot. But it was still a compromise, and I don't want to diminish that. I could talk about my times in the convenience store and be like, that was a cool job. Okay. You're remembering the story with the right narrative, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't think I wanted to work that hard to make that many mugs and bowls and plates and blah, 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 blah. I didn't want to do that. But then I got in a little further, and I saw where I was making a lot more money with that, and I was liking it. And I was getting good feedback, and I was finding levels of satisfaction that I didn't know were there.
Because you catered to an audience, would you say?
Yeah, I compromised. Yes, I cater to an audience. Like there's things I do and there's things I don't do, and I still don't do. I don't do shipping and handling. I don't take personal orders, and I don't do wholesale. But I do a whole bunch of other things so that my work sells a lot, and I've continued to build the brand, which is my name. And then the other compromise was, I was like, I don't want to teach people. What's this teaching thing all about? That's bullshit. I'm just an artist. And then I started to teach, and I was like, oh, teaching is fun. I'm still an artist. So you got your ball of clay. You have your hands and your tools. The ball of clay becomes something beautiful. Like the artist can take credit for that, but really the artist is just the instrument that allows that thing to form. You know, I don't really... You don't own the land. You're a custodian of it while you're alive. I don't really feel that responsible for my art. I feel like I'm the person that allowed these moments of art to express themselves now, because we're all products of our time and place, our experience and our culture and everything. And when you look at yourself from a distance, you realize you're just a tool in the manifestation of art. So then I realized, oh, so here's the ball of art, here's the artist, and here's the instructor. And what the instructor does is they tinker with that person's technique, mindset, creativity, brain, enthusiasm. And then you watch the artwork get created. And that's really interesting when that is kicking. So then I'm like, blah, 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 words, brain, creativity, impact, dialogue, a loop that feeds out over many years. And I really enjoy the feedback loop of creativity directed through the teacher to the student to the ball of clay or to whatever it is. And to go back to something else, it's the Bob bubble. Because there are certain dark thoughts that you've talked about which are like ubiquitous. Well, I don't have a lot of those thoughts. And I don't like it's easy like when you're tall to be like, oh, you short people should be taller. Like I wasn't
Just drink more milk.
right. I don't have a lot of dark thoughts in me, right? Some of the negative things that you and most people have. But what I've done is the Bob bubble, I can expand that. So people in my classes, I know they radiate off because I just have a sense of confidence, a belief. And that belief is something which I share with everybody.
Belief is contagious.
Yes. And so it's like, yeah, we can do this. You can do this. I'll sell to people. Okay, you're not ready to sell. You'll start to sell then. You'll start to do this. I just give people the timeline. Like I talked about you. We talked about a timeline. I will give people their timeline, and then I will slowly give them the little steps necessary so their little burgeoning like pots can then go into the marketplace. And then they can begin to sell. And then they can begin to taste that primary level of success that really, as you get older, unfortunately becomes like mentally necessary.
Now, so this is really interesting because I've heard people have this conversation with me, with themselves while talking to me, variety of things. But essentially, I feel like people look at the word compromise as like an inherently bad thing, right? And like I remember when the time came along where I was deciding like, should I do this for work? Should I do this for work? Should I continue doing this for school? And after I decided to quote, end of quote, compromise, the way it felt was more so that I accepted the possibility that a certain subset of actions, right, whatever they may be, just could allow me to have more control over the valuable decisions in my life, right? And the second I started doing it and I realized that, oh, wait a minute, I'm not actually compromising, I'm giving myself the capabilities, the resources, the know-how, the experience to be more equipped to make better decisions. I remember being super young and thinking to myself like, you know, like, oh, but if I go down this road, will it still really feel like me? Yeah, you're still the same person, right? So why don't you give that wonderful person more freedom to make better decisions that will give them more freedom? And it's difficult to realize until you get to that stage.
And freedom is defined by primarily finances in this?
It's not. So finance is just a part of it though, right? Like, so like, it's also the nature of making decisions so you can learn how to make better decisions. And like the unfortunate reality, well, actually it's not, it's just a reality, is that in the world we live in today, money is part of making decisions. But there are many other decisions that need to be made on a regular basis that have nothing to do with money. Like how do you balance, your creativity, your work, and the relationships that are important to you, right? And the relationships that are important to you, sure, like let's say, you get a long-term girlfriend, boyfriend, whoever it is. You're deciding whether or not to buy a spot, and the relationships and experiences you have with each other are happening in a house because you can afford the house. Cool. That's one thing. But at that point, it's so peripheral to the decision itself that things need to be addressed individually. Like if you're having a conversation about the house, you're having a conversation about the house. If you're having a conversation about how to build better, more memorable experiences with each other, well, then that's what you're talking about. So like, I know that there are decisions I've made operationally in my career, right, which have helped me to gain the insight I need to be more attentive to the people in my life. And I would have never possibly imagined when I was younger that could be possible, right? And then I find that once there is that emotional element to it, that it can also be applied to the things I do artistically, right? And then you get back to this trifecta and, you start to see how things feed each other. And the more that you create this symbiosis within yourself of the different elements in your life, the more that you're able to see opportunity, try things, feel confident in them. And that it's not one fixed thing. Like when I say freedom, it is a potential to continue, right? Because there's so many different flavors of freedom, and you got to be smart about all of them. So
I'm very curious. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull this in a different direction for a second. And it's funny that you mentioned money, because we've been talking a lot about money, and I'm not a money man myself. I need to be more of a money man, but I'm going to derail it into something that I'd like to talk about, which is inspiration and that confidence that you were talking about. And beyond the money, the regular drive that goes into the art. And like, my expenses for writing this book is I bought 500 pieces of paper. I bought a typewriter for $20. I fixed that typewriter with my own intuition and know-how. I've replaced the ribbon, and I really just have to sit down. And ribbon? I have to publish, and I have to edit, and I have to self-publish. Huh?
The ribbon.
Oh yeah, a typewriter ribbon. So the way you get the ink onto the page is a ribbon that is just coated in black ink.
Okay.
And it rotates itself as you type.
All right.
Which is a recent problem I had. The typewriter ribbon would not rotate. So I'd sit there and type, and after like a line, it would just become dim and useless. So I fixed that. So I think my main hiccup is less money related and is more doing. Like you talk about being able to do, like you could run all day just rapping and writing songs. You've proven that to me that you can do that with everything, having known you for as long as I have. You, likewise. You as well. It's very impressive. I feel very opposite on the other hand. I like to think that I could, but there is like slight hiccups. And so were there ever any times where you had to like sit down and tell yourself that you have to do this? Or is it just like a natural magnetism and confidence? Or any advice that you'd have?
Like balancing
for moving forward and just doing.
Balancing the discipline with how to fuel your natural inspirations kind of thing.
More just the discipline. Because my inspirations are there naturally.
So I would say, first off, I want to talk about time a little bit and money. So money is just a tool of time.
Right.
That's it. So it's like you go to work to make money. You sacrifice your time to make money to pay your expenses to survive. So if you had $1 million, you wouldn't work. You'd have your little trust fund. Right. So that's what it is. It's all just about time or energy on a more metaphysical level.
Is a big component.
Right. So that's just think of it in terms of what am I sacrificing, what am I gaining.
Exactly.
In terms of, I really feel like I would call myself a wordsmith. When I'm fired up, I am great with words. I think I'm a great speaker. I hate writing. It's so painful for me to write because like the words come out like this and my brain's like whoosh, 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 whoosh. And I'm like, I cannot reconcile that.
Yeah.
I have all these things that are left undone.
We talk and run on sentences,
So
I'm gonna get a chair with a background. I'm dying in that thing.
Cool.
Okay.
I would look at your question differently, because the social person is going to have so much easier of a time succeeding than the non-social person.
Right.
Your success story is coming from your mouth, not from your discipline.
Okay. Well, I like that. I like thinking about that more.
So you need to find a balance in your discipline. But remember, it's the person who can go where they're not welcome and have a good time. If they ever channel that into becoming successful as a musician, as the lead singer, man, you're going to kick ass at that, right? Because you're going to have that weird thing that, like, people's like, what the fuck is going on with that person? they're gonna want to know, right? You're going to use that as your hook.
right,
unconsciously.
The words and the
Your
interaction.
just your shtick.
Right.
Right. But it's more than a shtick. A shtick is like a single affect, right? In terms of how do you find discipline, like when we were in Jersey and I was working, and I worked basically from like 6 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night. And I don't know, I've thought a lot about this because I can do this. Like I like click, click. I just pop a gear and I just slow down and I just stop thinking a lot. And I'm able.
Now, how do you do that?
I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about this because I can't do it for writing, but I can do it. I can dig holes. I can sand things. There's things I can do for hours that are very pleasant. I'm just like, click, click. And I just like, I don't know, alpha, beta, sigma. Like, I can just like guide my brain to a lower frequency. And I often like to watch TV. I like to listen to the like wah, 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 voices of like a judge show or a drama. Not so much a comedy. It could be too much attention. Mm-hmm. But I don't even need those things. And so I would look to you to explore your inner voice, your inner dialogue, and how do you relax that sufficiently
So that I can write.
so that you can not be conscious of yourself in the process of doing or being. Because you're becoming anxious because you're having non-writing thoughts. Like, I should be doing this, I should be doing that, I need to do this, right? And those thoughts, if they become loud enough, will either slow you or stop you from being present in what you're doing.
Right.
For some people, it may not be very obvious how that is accomplished. I remember giving myself absolutely no guidance to figure it out. And I remember, like, the intermittent times where I would have that place where, like, it really does just feel like your brain is just, like, kind of slowing down a bit. But the amount that can happen in that space of time where you're not being distracted by the this and the that and all the trivialities and stuff, so much can happen. And I gave myself absolutely no requirements on it. And of course, the thing that eventually allowed me to reach that lower place is fundamentally insane. But here we are, and it's, yeah. See, like, for me, a lot of it is just, like, slam, like, 10 cups of coffee, be slightly agitated about something, put on, like, several global news stations, and then sit there and do data science for 8 hours. But for some reason, that's the thing that does it. Yeah, I just kind of wound up there, fell ass backwards into it, and here we are.
I'm slowly getting there with jazz.
Jazz
I
is
found
the
that if
thing.
I put jazz
Sounds
on
much
my
simpler.
record player, I'm more inclined to write. Music, it's like what you're saying with, like, a show. Like a television show playing in the background, that, like, little bit of, like... It almost feels like because something's playing in the background that I'm doing more or something else.
I feel like I can be where I'm at, and then I can bounce over to that thing, and then I can bounce back, and then all these thoughts that get winding and build momentum, I can keep them at bay a little bit.
Because you're doing two separate
Yes.
things. and
Two
bouncing
separate
around.
things, yes, yeah.
Well,
Yes.
I just recently wrote 12 pages in one 6-hour sitting, and I think what really helped, especially with that, is I did it with a friend of mine. He was practicing his music,
You see,
and
that
I
would be,
was
remember I
writing.
was saying energy in a room, like you're not talking, but that vibe energy is I think it's very fruitful.
Well, he's also been a big inspiration on me just in general.
Well, you
because
could
he
come
has
out.
that
You could come out
magnetism.
and type in the studio.
I might do that tonight.
Yeah,
That'd be good.
that might be great.
Because it's that other tactile thing that, like, makes me focus for some reason. But it can't be typically songs with words, because then that distracts me.
The other thing I
See,
would
that's the fascinating thing. For me, a lot of it comes down to only words. Because then it's just like, listen, just focus on your own words and don't listen to those words.
Yeah.
You know?
No.
The other thing I would say to you, though, if you are an extrovert or more, it's not about a label. If you derive a certain thrill from that, like Friday and Saturday, really get out there and like get your fill that need up
Of people.
and then you get Sunday and Monday, and then you can like
Work for those other couple days.
Yeah, right,
Subsist
yeah.
off
Put
of
fuel in the tank, my man.
fuel in
Right.
the tank, and then some social
But
interaction.
so you're not trying to deny one thing to get to another. You're enhancing one thing to make another thing even better.
I think that is good advice, because that is something I do struggle with, is because I do like to go out and I like to talk to people.
Right.
I
exactly.
love to talk to people. I love to talk.
Giving that up is not going to be a secret to your success.
It actually hinders it, because I'll choose not to go out, and then I'll spend the whole night going,
Right.
I
You're
didn't
not there.
go out.
You're not there. Right.
Why didn't I do
want-
that?
Right.
and then I don't do anything anyway, and then it's just
Right. Because you're
completely
not there.
wasted.
You're not. Your head's not there.
Yeah.
Yep.
And for some people like me, I could just turn it on and off. He could turn it on and off. Whatever. Like that's not who you are. Like I don't want to give personal. I like telling a personal story.
Right.
But personal advice is great for like me.
See, Momo, it's
great for me hearing the sound of my own voice.
You and I are actually very similar in that respect. Some people, it's a switch. You flip it on, you flip it off. See, for other people, it's about the track that you're on, the intention that you're carrying, the kind of like the wave that you're riding, right? So that's why it's important to become a train. You see, because it's like, you know, you got to be able to make your stops at the station, right? But as you're going, you know, you can't push something forward without, like, you know, enough things to make it go, right? And once it's going, you got to let it ride. You can't get in its way. You know, you can't put a bunch of stuff on the tracks. But, you know, you do got like 20,000, you know, tons of cargo behind you, so you just got to be mindful of your stops. And that's why it's important to map out your route, think ahead, and then, you know, have people enjoy the train.
I do think that I would personally myself like to build a better rapport with not having to rely on that all the time. Maybe not 100%. Like, I do, you know, I know who I am, and there's things that I definitely need. That being said, just like for a somewhat embarrassing example, I wrote like 6 really good pages not too long ago. Really happy with them, very, very inspired. The way I wrote them was not inspiring at all, and was actually like super upsetting. But I was called by my ex-girlfriend, and she spent, you know, like 2 hours berating me and making me feel bad. We haven't dated in like 2 years now, which is ridiculous.
This is why
And
you
then-
don't pick up phone calls from your exes.
And I was supposed to be writing that night, and I wasn't going to let this stop me. But I also have a difficulty hanging up on people for some reason, because I'm not built like that. So I'm sitting out
I
there.
take full advantage of that almost every single weekend.
So I'm sitting there in the solarium with my typewriter, with her on speakerphone. And this is the only time that words actually were helpful. And she was basically yelling at me for 3 hours while I was just like, all right, okay, all right. And I wrote some of the best stuff because it was directly inspired. It was like a piece about, like, don't go back to things that don't work, just because while you're not there, all you see are the good things that once existed. And I was like, oh my God, don't go back to the things that once worked. Because right now, you know, 4 hours ago, I was thinking about you, and I was like, oh, things weren't that bad. And now I'm sitting here trying to write a book while you're yelling at me for things that I have never done. And that's amazing. And I got a great, great piece out of that. But I would like to be able to look in myself and pull those inspirations from experiences a lot better, rather than like having to be
present.
in that experience. Like, it comes to poetry too. Like, I've written a lot of really great pieces of poetry. And usually when I write a really great piece of poetry, it's because I've just been gobsmacked. And my legs are
Gobsmacked is
shaking,
good,
I
yes.
can't stand, and it's just like pure rage or emotion.
Well, what I would say is there's different kinds of expression, right? So what you're saying is your trauma expression is an easier point for you to access.
Yeah.
It comes out more freely, and your like neutral gear expression is more muddled or less.
Yeah, and even the joy aspect is harder for me to get out sometimes too.
Right. So, I mean, I don't have particular advice.
relates.
Just see that there's a distinction, and then, like, jazz helps you. So that's good. That facilitates that. Like, is it the space? Is it the mind space? I would just look around at the tools. Like, it's like you have another little consciousness behind your other conscious. who tries to observe and then like check that was good, check that wasn't good. Don't do that one again, but do that one again, and just build a success checklist for yourself that will allow you to write.
Right. It's
And
like you got to have that voice be like a neutral party. It's very easy for creative types to have that be like a self-destructive, judgy voice, but it's also very easy for that. Well, I wouldn't call it easy. It is very possible for that self-judgy, self-destructive voice to become something that keeps you in check and in the long term makes your day-to-day life significantly more enjoyable. It's also very easy for them to flip between the two, which is what you got to watch out for, though.
Right.
Yeah.
I like looking for things specifically that facilitate a better atmosphere. Because I
Right.
feel like I definitely don't do that enough because my like spurts of inspiration sometimes are so far and few between. I like take full advantage of it while it's happening, and I don't take stride to figure out why it's happening. I just enjoy the fact that it is, and I go. And I like that, but it'd be nice to be able to figure out how to facilitate that a little
But you're
bit
doing
better.
poetry, right? So you can use.
I am always writing.
I know, but you can use the exploratory mindset of understanding why you are inspired as a source of inspiration.
So what I
It's doable.
would say personally, like when I go into the studio, and I always think I'm always buying one-way tickets. So that means I don't know exactly where I'm going. And so sometimes I get into the studio and I was thinking, I'm going to throw on the wheel. And it's like, oh, my back's a little tight. Oh, I'm more tired than I thought I am. I'm not going to throw on the wheel. So then I'm going to run down a checklist. This is the athlete in me, the artist athlete who does a check-in. What's the thing I should be doing now that meets both my physical body and my mental mindset? And so, oh, I'm a little bit more tired. I'm not going to throw on the wheel. Do I want to sit in my comfy chair and carve? Nah, I got a little more energy than that. Oh, why don't I roll out some slabs and I'll make some planners. Maybe I'll make some snails. I'll work on my cops. So I have a checklist of different things that I can do that can meet my different. So maybe like poetry, so then you can just click the poetry button on and off.
That one.
So maybe you just start always writing a little bit of poetry, and then when you're like, oh, I think I've descended a couple levels below all this thinking. Now I can quickly transition into my book. I know when I would write, sometimes I just like I said it here. I got to shit out a whole bunch of thoughts, and then I'm not caught like. I got out enough of them, and now I'm in a space where I'm a little bit more coherent because I've said a bunch of the thoughts that are whirling around. And maybe there's ways within the writing, there's different things you can do. Maybe you do proofreading.
Yeah.
Right? I would try to think of the writing in tiers of responsibilities. And when I'm in a low ebb, maybe that's a great time to go back and make notes and corrections. And then when I'm really feeling the fervent creativity, then boom, right in, and I ride that as long and hard as I can.
So the one-way ticket idea, this goes back to what you were talking about with how to schedule things into your day. So is the one-way ticket something that you can kind of set a very loose clock to? Is it part of your normal weekly schedule? And once you get there, are there any restraints on time? Or have you set up...
Well, I'm 58 years old,
Yeah.
so, like, I have more responsibilities than I want, so my time is allocated more than I want. But, like, yesterday, like, okay, so people were over forever, but from, like, 3 to 11, I was just in the studio working. I thought it was going to be from 1 to 11, and I could have worked longer if I wouldn't have gotten tired.
So what is that moment like where unplanned, you don't realize, but you have to switch... essentially, the ride stops, right? Like the one-way ticket, it's like you get off here, like it or not, right? What is that like for you when all of a sudden the responsibilities come back into frame, the obligations come back into frame, and you got to kind of change the emotional subsets that you're pulling yourself from to engage with something new? Because when it's a one-way ticket, my God, what a wonderful ride! But
Well,
it can be tough.
I would say, like, I talk about growing up. So I was saying part of growing up was not buying as many one-way tickets and not buying them for as long, and realizing that like owning a house, having dogs, having a wife, teaching, these aren't part of the artist's plan. Do you know what I mean? Like these are part of growing up, and so like I try to shield little artist Bobby. But like he is grown up too, So I still know how to good time and be silly, right?
Yeah.
But I can't buy the one-way tickets for the extended amount of time that I used to. I could make changes, I could downsize. But, I could do it. It's a prioritization thing. Like I suffer the slings of being such a good teacher that instead of teaching 2 classes, I teach 5. But those classes become so emotionally bonded and everybody comes so close. Man, there'd be a lot of tears. There would be a lot of people crying if I stopped the class.
Yeah. I like, as long as I can remember, I always knew I was like, I need a house, I need a car, I need a few basic things, and I will be exceedingly uncomfortable until I have them. So that is where I differ from most people in this category. But, right, like, if we zoom in just a little bit, like, let's say you have a day where, like, your energy levels are right, you're looking at the world in just the right way, and you're able to kind of lower that tempo in your brain and shut out the bullcrap, right? Like, when I think of a one-way ticket, right, I think of the days where, like, I'm able to, like, go into the studio, I can turn on the console, people aren't home, I can, like, turn on all the analog synthesizers and just sit there and do sound design for the sake of sound design, right? And every once in a while, right, I'll get a phone call, I'll get an email, UPS guy's knocking at my door for some reason, right? And then I gotta switch it, and then sometimes it's tough to get back there. So when I think of a one-way ticket, I think about that, like, personal freedom that is just in one sense of a mindset where you are no longer anticipating your obligations, right? So, like, for someone like you who's been doing it for that long, right? Like, what does it feel like when you have to switch back to the point where you have to remember what all those things are?
I don't like it.
It
Feels like not yummy.
Well, yes.
It feels like I don't want to eat that anymore. That tastes funny on my tongue.
Right. What are some of the things that you've done to, like, be like, oh, well, I know I need to do these things and I'm supposed to be doing these things. So what do you do to kind of sweeten up the flavor a little bit?
Well, you try to change the narrative in your mind to make it seem better.
Fair enough.
I'm not dodging your question. I'm just not.
No,
I'm not sure how to answer it in the way
like,
that.
There is no one set answer.
Right.
I'm just interested to know if it ever gets easier.
Right. When you grow up, you slow down a little bit. Your fire isn't as hot as it was, and I think it gets easier.
Well,
It gets easier when your fire isn't as hot
Yeah,
as it
like
was.
I mean, yeah, when like he says I can go all day.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you might be in 20 years, it's not so easy to go all day.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So then it's
Well, that's
easier
almost-
to detach because you don't have as much energy, balls to the wall to be like expelling that much energy, right? Mm-hmm. So like sometimes Peggy, she wants me to come in at 11 because it's harder for her to fall asleep, and I'm like, I thought I was gonna work till 12:30. What's this 11 bullshit all about? But then like happy wife, happy life. And I'm already tired. I'm sure I can climb into my chair and squeeze another hour and a half out. So I think it's about narrative management is the best answer that I have.
right.
And making sure that here's the best answer I'd have. When I'm frustrated by a lack of time to be creative, I set about a process of thinking about when I'm going to have more time.
Right.
And then
Right.
making sure that when I get to that time, we're there.
Yep.
I execute then.
Yeah, and then that's where discipline comes back into play. And like, that's amazing. First of all, like, you've absolutely answered the exact question I was looking for. Like, I just want to make sure that is known. For me, the pre-planning for knowing when it's going to happen next and then sticking to it every single time that I'm able to do that, my God, does it make a difference. In the moment where I'm getting back to the point where my head's clear enough to actually do the pre-planning and to stick to it, something that really helps me in those scenarios is like literally being able to contextualize, all right, well, you have the moment where you're about to get agitated and then remembering that these people in your life, these things in your life allow you to have this stuff in the first place. And so being able to switch that framing, it's always jarring and it's never perfectly easy, but finding your own personal way of exercising that ability to quickly switch gears, the moment you fall out of practice with it.
I want to go back to this idea of goals a little bit because you talked about like you had this like Maybe I'm supposed to be a rock star or a rap star. I realize you know not literally ever have wanted to pursue that, but you had a little bit of that narrative in your head, and that's provided some unhealthy guidance, right? So why aren't you living in Nashville or New York City or Los Angeles? Because if you want that, you got to go to the place to make it happen. So it's like, if I'm living in the suburbs of Philadelphia, I'm never going to be a famous potter, right? So, but I knew that, right? I didn't take the steps. I didn't go to the places where that happens, right? I don't want to live in New York City. Los Angeles, right? I'm not for that. I would be so frustrated there. So then I know that my choices are dictating. So then set goals on a year or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. Set very accessible, succeedable goals. And then make sure you hit those goals. And you know what? If you spend 3 years hitting little goals and remember it, it's going to feel good. And it's going to build momentum. And goals can be equipment. It could be live shows. It can be hours rehearsed. It could be working a job less. Like, make your own little personal goals. Hit those goals. And then set new goals. And then hit those goals. And then one day, you'll look back and be like, okay, wow, look at where I'm at.
Yes.
And you didn't do anything big. You didn't move to LA. You just thought, what are the little things that I can do that's going to move me forward step by step?
All right, I'm gonna talk super candidly for a second, because I think that coming out of college for myself, I studied music entrepreneurship at Penn State, and I with the circle that I had around me, with just my own goals, I think I had it in my head to I didn't outright plan I'm gonna be a rock star.
Right.
Because that sounds crazy. And
Taylor Swift comes from,
exactly.
from not far away.
Exactly. See, it was those little things that Taylor Swift comes from literally Pennsylvania.
Right.
You have people I was watching Alessia Cara got famous at 18. I was like, I could do a lot of what she was doing.
Or better. Well, you don't turn on the radio for inspiration. It's bullshit, right?
Yeah.
So don't feed into bullshit and then be disappointed.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head of what I was trying to get to, because I think there was a lot of feeding into bullshit without the ability to be honest with myself that I didn't really want I didn't want the goal that I wasn't allowing myself to see that I wanted.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I mean, what our own mind can do is amazing, even if it's kind of horrific.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
That's where all the magic happens.
Right, the dark magic and the beautiful magic. Right?
So, I want to talk about that concept of what does making it mean, because for me, I kind of define it down to three things, and that is, one, to make the best possible version of the art that I can in the present, and now that is a pretty wide scope. That could be from getting the perfect recording with the right microphone at the right time and having the delivery be exactly right, or that could be doing it for an audience in front of and playing a big show or a small show. Whatever show is the right one, and I can feel it in the moment when it is, because I've hit it before. And it's this was the right one. This was the way this song was supposed to be expressed at this time in the universe, and that is why I do this. So that's one. Two is to get my message across. And I feel maybe that's selfish to a capacity, but I want people to feel exactly the way I felt in a moment, just so they are able to understand and gain my perspective about how I came up in the world, and how maybe if I get this tiny portion of my message across, then I can have an impact on the bigger picture. Then I can change the way that people think about their environment. And once again, I feel like a part of that is maybe a little vain ego piece, but also like I feel like a lot of times I try to talk about selfless things or not things that are related to myself, and so it might be good to get those messages across. And the third component, and arguably the most important to me, is while doing all these things, to maintain my connection to my culture, which is both family oriented and music oriented, but more than anything it's nature oriented. And that like this weekend I spent a lot of time recording in the studio and like getting it working on music and mixing stuff, but also on like Saturday morning I got up and I went birding for like 8 hours of my day. And like keeping my connection with nature, which in my way is bird watching primarily, that is just as, if not more important. Like if I was not a bird watcher, I would not be an artist. And and so it's just as important. And like I feel like those three things create like a stable triangle that are like integral to one another. All three of those things have to happen. I need to make art as best as I can. I need to get the message across that is within that art. And in order for both of those things to happen, I need to keep my connection with my culture.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So do you feel like when you were originally describing success, right? You were talking about that like spontaneous feeling. Mm-hmm. When you feel it, you know it, it hits and it's there, right? Mm-hmm. I almost think of that as like island hopping, right? So, but that's not to say it's a good thing, it's a bad thing. It's just, a momentary metaphor. So, one thing I'm wondering is if you have hit it before, right? You're hitting all the right islands, you're having a great time in between. Do you find yourself bird watching more often or less often when you have tighter successions of those moments?
I think I've never found a correlation. I think it's indifferent. I think that maybe more,
okay,
a tiny bit, but I really don't see a correlation.
So the reason why I was asking is because for me, right, like when I see like good regular intervals of success, and it's defined just in my own head as a feeling, right? Mm-hmm. I find that much more frequently I'm able to wake up naturally without an alarm at like 6:50 in the morning every single day, and by 5 p.m. my ass is on that couch, right? And so something that I've noticed is that if I focus on the overtly big goals, right, it just keeps getting further and further away. But if I focus on the fact, just like what you were saying with smaller goals and goals that are more symptomatic of bigger goals, right? Mm-hmm. So if I find that I'm thinking about, it's like, all right, well, what do I need to get a better night's sleep? What do I need to just like be ready to go the moment the sun comes up? And what do I need to make sure of? How do I prioritize my time to make sure that 5 p.m. rolls around, things are looking good? Oddly enough, the amount of variables that go into just that, for me personally, are nearly incountable. And so for that reason, you focus on this. I like to focus on just those small things that take me to the point where when I see it frequently, I know I'm doing it right. So I was asking to see if bird watching for you was one of those symptomatic things.
There's a single variable for me. It is not infinite variables. And that one I guess you could define it as more, but it's discipline. And am I choosing to get out of bed in the morning at 6 o'clock or at 10 o'clock? And is that moment of that first like rising, the first opening of my eyes where I'm like, all right, am I going to stand up right now and go do all the things that I want to do, or am I going to sleep? And that is the one thing that, both in a big sense and in a small sense, like, am I going to open my eyes and am I going to stand up, or am I going to save money right now? Or like,
right.
One's the big, one's the small. And I don't think there's ever a quantifiable amount where I'm like, oh, I need to go bird watching this X amount of times.
Oh,
this
no,
week.
no, no, no.
But
You
it's
never
like-
want to think about it that much. It's
No.
like, think about it like there's a place you like to go. It's your favorite park, right? And you find that you only ever even think about going there when, like, you feel right inside, you got the time, right? Well, what makes you feel right? What gives you the time, right? For me,
A lot of
yeah.
times it's the natural flow of the world and the birds themselves that steer that, because right now, this time of year, it's migration season. In the early spring, it's also migration season. And so but also there are other times outside of migration where it's like, this specific place is going to be a specific way and it's going to attract a specific kind of bird. And for that reason, I have to go out this week because nature is telling me to go out there.
Now I can see him. I can see you smiling about this, just thinking about it, right? So do you ever find that things either in your personal life or your creative life, right, are introducing enough constantly moving variables to where you don't really have the opportunity to think about those things that give you that little smile, you know?
In personal life,
Yeah.
personal, yes, is sometimes an obstacle. Creative is never an obstacle. Creative is like, the idea of allocating time for that one-way ticket earlier is insane to me. Because the inspiration, while I can switch on and off at any moment and just write a song, if I hear an instrumental that I like, I can write a song instantly. But also there is a large amount of oh, now there's an instrumental I really like, or today had a certain set of circumstances where I'm like, holy shit, that is a song that is needs to be created today.
Yep.
So while I can switch it, there is a constant line of I could write a second even a cappella at any moment, but there's also these spikes and these valleys too, in the same way that I mentally go through hills and valleys, the art goes through hills and valleys, but nature is weird in that something about it makes me just want to go out and see some hills and valleys.
So do you have any of those symptomatic indicators, like something you see, something that you're a part of, which you don't really think about it very often, but when you see it, things are really going right?
Well, I would say, let me come back to that, but I would say the greatest satisfaction that I get maybe in life is sometimes I'll be working on a piece and I'll finish it, and I'll usually finish it at the end of the night, and I'll go to bed and I'll feel like a complete discharge of myself. I'm just at peace.
Yeah.
And it feels amazing.
I feel that a lot too.
And I don't know, but one thing that is never just right. I realize everything is just right, but sometimes it's the blending of having gotten it right against the small edge of imperfection is the absolute best.
Yeah.
That's why let's go get the book of computer art. That's so barfy, right? We almost all invariably have a negative reaction to it. There's no imperfection. Do you know what I mean? There's no humanity in it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's it took me so long to really I'm not striving for the imperfection.
You're talking
but I
AI
can
art.
really hug up next to it and not fix it sometimes in the way that I didn't used to be able to, and I really like that a lot.
That really reminds me of what you were talking about earlier when comparing compromise to when we were talking about giving yourself the option for opportunity, right? It's the same. In my mind, it's very similar, right? The imperfection in the art is very similar to accepting your own flaws, your own risks, your own possibility, gambling with your own emotions to just go for it. Things are going to get broken. Things are going to go wrong, but a big part of it is just sticking to it,
So what I feel like you've said two different things on a broader level. So the one thing is, there's a need for a certain amount of equipment and money and opportunity to get from here to there, and this is where you want to be, and this is where you're at. Whatever that is. I don't know you well enough, so I can only conjecture so far. I don't really know what kind of music you play. There's a lot I don't know. So there's the you got the bird thing, you got the motivation thing. You got to move forward at a timeline that works for you. And part of that, I guess, is playing out or being heard.
Yeah.
So
that's
part of it is a material thing, like enough money or enough time to build up to hit your critical threshold, which I guess you're not at yet. But the other thing is budgeting your discipline to move forward incrementally to be heard
Yeah.
in the way that you want to be heard.
Budgeting your discipline.
That's huge.
Because one's gonna come easy. You'll jam in the studio all you want. Fuck that.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
got an endless supply of that. But how are you gonna move forward on this other tier, the
Yeah.
being heard tier?
Absolutely.
How do you develop small steps or big steps that move you forward properly? And one thing that I learned, I don't like this. But this has worked for me. Like, Bob doesn't send out, like, I don't send out blank anything anywhere ever because I just don't get a positive response. I succeed when I show this thing to those things, right? And I think my work is great, so I don't really understand that. But I have to present myself, I have to do my shtick, and then doors open,
Yep.
right?
People care about stories.
Yeah,
and
but I
our
can't
faces
like
are
I
a
don't I
story.
can't apply to shows. Not that I don't get in. You get into a show. So what? It sits there for 6 weeks. It comes back to you. Are you? Unfortunately, largely you have to sell yourself, and then your little artlings will follow behind you, and they will sell too, right? So what I'm saying
I've
to
already
you,
felt that
there's some way. I'm just conjecture now. You've got to sell yourself, your story harder to be heard in the way that you need to be heard to bring the third triad of your success to fruition.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know that we're going to be running out of time very, very shortly. So I wanted to wrap up with a couple of like very important things, right? So one of the things that we're going to be doing with the show moving forward is we want to give people the opportunity to hear these kind of conversations, right? And, you know, be part of it just by listening in, right?
Yeah.
Because the more opportunities you have to think about the framing of creativity, your career, your lifestyle, everything just boils down to who you are and what you're doing with it. So just to wrap things up, so how are you doing right now, and are you happy with where you are?
I love my life.
That's phenomenal.
My life is so much better now than the story that I was hoping to create 40 years ago.
Right.
And I'm shocked by that. But part of that is emphasizing the positive. And it's not a denial of the negative, because denial is just suppression, and suppression is just the bubbling that gets to come up later, manifest in a greater form.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm really happy.
Do you think that if anybody had come to you around that age where you were saying to yourself, like, I'm going to be an artist, right? It's
when I
before
was
you were at
working
the
in the
point.
Unimart.
Right. And somebody had come to you and said, hey, you can do everything you want to do with your life. You can get a house, you can support a family, you can follow your dreams, and you can feel great about it along the way by doing this. Would you have believed yourself?
I would have been skeptical that I was going to be allowed to have everything. I thought I was going to have to make some deeper cuts, some deeper compromises to get some of the art things that I wanted.
It's
I didn't know that like I could have a house, a kid, a wife, a good social life, a good group of friends, and the financial resources to like whatever.
So what? Just to wrap things up here, tell me an example of when you kind of had that realization where that fear, more so that uncertainty, that confusion, that inability to see the path from A to B, right? With A being you and your art, and B being all the things that you just described, right? What was one of the moments where like one of the walls came down and you were like, I actually can do this. All of my worrying here has just been nonsense. I just need to stick to it, you know? What's like one final story where you saw a wall came down and you started to come into your own with it?
Well, so I started off by doing shows, craft shows, and I didn't sell very well. And I was surprised by that because, you look around at your peers and I was like, that's not very good, that's not very good, that's very good. Why are they so busy? God damn it. And so the shift that I didn't know that was going to happen was I sell more of my work at stores than I do at shows. And okay, so hindsight is easy. I don't like Like, I'm not a dame. I don't like putting flowers and lace. I don't decorate everything as nicely. I'm more sparse like a guy. And I think I undersell my stuff. And then I go into a store and I see somebody who has more of an interior design touch, and then my work has sold better. So I was like, well, how am I don't have a big mailing list. Fuck mailing list. Everybody's like mailing list. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing shipping and handling. But it was like the stores worked out good, and I was like, well, that wasn't very hard. I just
like third-party stores?
Yeah, third-party stores, yeah. And so I just like, when I saw something that I didn't comprehend, we just coexisted together often until the route presented itself. The route was stores as opposed to craft shows, right? And then I coexisted with my discomfort, and now I do better at shows, right? And so, but that's been like, oh, that's a revelation. So I can go there and make $1,200 in a day. I was like, because that didn't work before, and my work's not that much different, but it's different enough, I guess.
Do you sell on the internet at all?
I don't, because there's one of these 80s decisions. I was like, man, I don't want the boxes and the packing material and like double boxing. I had a client was over yesterday, and they bought $1,000 worth of stuff, and I called my friend who owns a store, Drew, and I was like, Drew, I got some shipping and handling for you to do, and he's gonna make $20 an hour or $25, and he's gonna do all my shipping. But packing pottery, you got to double box it. It's complicated, and it's like you could fill this room with the boxes and packing material and all that bullshit. That's not part of being creative.
Wow.
I'm streamlined. A store's great. They come, they take their work. I don't have to give away a single weekend.
Yeah.
I just have to give away half of the manufacturer resected resale price. That's it.
Reasonable though.
So wait. Before
Now for some people that's a lot.
Yeah.
For me that's
A drop in a bucket.
That's great.
Yeah.
My time, I just give away my money for my time.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to point out here that not only have you been able to like have children, get married, have a house, have a wonderful life just by working with clay, but also you don't even sell anything online, right? So I think it's important to illustrate that like if you're considering doing something like this, there's definitely a lot of doors open, and it's important not to be too self-critical and too self-judgmental, shutting yourself out from possibility, So if somebody was interested, right, in getting a hold of you for the things that you make, right, would the best way be to call you?
Yeah, I would say text because it's
A text
2023.
message?
And who
Well,
calls?
for
But yeah,
whenever we release this, what's the phone number to text?
610-892-0386, and I think BobDeane.com, BobDeanePottery.com. I switched my website, and now
You have a little like contact form on there, something like that?
it's on the back. Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Sweet.
Wonderful.
All right, Bob. Have a good one. Thanks for talking with us. Hey, what are you still doing here? The episode's over. Hey, thanks for listening, and tune in next week because we got Andrew Brown, Light and Sound Studios, in this studio. It's gonna be awesome. But anyway, I'm talking too much. The episode's over, so until next time, have a good one.
The Art of Possibility podcast, featuring Casey Brown, Moses Stubbs, Bobo G, and Andrew Curry, is brought to you by Mechanizer Studios and AG Digital Media. You can find us on streaming services everywhere, and on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube as @ArtofPossibilityPod. Thank you.